This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, Jamie Bogner. We have a special episode of the podcast today, and joining me on this episode is our new managing editor, Joe Stange. Welcome to the podcast, Joe Stange.
Thank you. It's my first ever Craft Beer and Brewing podcast.
And welcome to Craft Beer and Brewing as well. Joe's been a longtime contributor to the magazine. In fact, has had features in the magazine going back to our very first issue when you wrote about Saison, you're doing it wrong, or Belgian beer, you're doing it wrong. And has written a number of fantastic features for the magazine. Now he is back in the United States after a few years overseas in Europe. And he's written a few books like Around Belgium and 80 Beers with Evan de Betz and
Good Beer Guide Belgium.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. And his former contributing editor of Draft magazine. So this is, like I said, the special episode of the podcast. We're going to talk about our annual Best in Beer. We have a few facets to this, which I'll explain in a few minutes. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. Thinking outside of the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention this podcast and receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller. Also, Tavour makes it possible to access and discover the highest-rated craft beers from all over the world through the free mobile app. Twice a day, you get access to new limited beer from an independent craft brewer. Imagine sipping a vanilla ice cream stout from Wild Leap Brewing in Georgia or Juicy Bits IPA from Weldworks in Colorado. Join the independent beer community today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. So the basic format for our annual Best in Beer issue is multifaceted. We find when we are trying to define something as broad a concept as best, that the finest way to do that and the most accurate way to do that is to do it in a lot of different ways. And so the ways, there's no single method that's going to give you, a complete picture of how these things happen. And so we do it in a couple facets. Number one, we do a reader survey, and we survey. We have an email list with over 70,000 members on the email list. We send it out to that list, say, hey, fill out this web survey. And it takes some time, and people put a lot of thought into this. One of the methods that we use when we have people fill out this reader survey, especially when it comes to filling out things from categories like beers of the year, is that we do not do multiple choice. We ask everybody to type out a name, because if we put multiple choice in there, we're basically putting our thumb on the scale and telling people what they should easily vote for rather than clicking on an other category and entering something that way. This is the only way to do it, I think, in a kind of fair method that's going to give us real answers. Creates a whole lot of work on our part to go through, clean up that data, and really understand what people kind of are trying to say with some of these answers that they type out. But that's the reader survey portion of it. We will work through and talk about some of those reader survey results through this podcast. The next portion of it is our critics lists. We ask some pretty smart beer people out there in the world of beer, like Kate Bernat and Stan Hieronymus, and our fan favorite Alex Kidd of Don't Drink Beer, who is always hilarious and entertaining, and for their favorite picks, the breweries and the beers and the trends that have stuck out to them. We're not going to go through that on this podcast. You'll have to pick up the magazine and buy that, or better, subscribe to the magazine. Because you should be asking yourself right now, why do I not subscribe to the magazine? If you do subscribe to the magazine, then you got an email today, November 1st, the day that this podcast is dropping, with a link to download this issue and a Best of Beer issue. Or you also were able to access it early this morning in the app, our mobile apps on Android and iOS, because subscribers get first access to this. That's just how it works. If you don't subscribe, go to the website, beerandbrewing.com, and hit the subscribe button. Subscribe right now. We'll get you set up immediately so you can access all of this best in beer content and see the full breadth of what we are talking about on the podcast today. After the critics lists, we have what we consider the pièce de résistance of the best in beer issue.
That's only the first of many bad French pronunciations coming up today. I can sense it. There are more.
Each year, we, the editorial team of Craft Beer and Brewing, as well as in conjunction and with feedback from our critics and from our blind tasting panel, we take a look at all the beers that we've reviewed across the year, the beers we've tasted in places where we haven't had a chance to do full reviews of them, and we try to find those beers that sum up what this year in beer is, and that can be those top scorers, those beers that are classic that still blew us away. They can be fresh faces that have just shot out of nowhere and completely floored us. There's a whole bunch of different criteria that we use when we develop this editor's picks for the best 19 beers of 2019. We're going to do that last on the podcast and just to make you wait because we're cruel like that. But let's get started in talking about our best categories, and we're going to get started, I think, first by talking about our Reader's Choice Best Beers of 2019.
I mean, this is arguably the biggest list. I mean, this is the most democratic one. This isn't us elitists from on high saying, hey, we think these beers are great. This is the people who read the magazine saying what are their favorite beers, and you add up thousands of that and it gets to be really interesting.
So we allow every person filling out the survey to list up to 5 beers in this category. And I think, that's an interesting dynamic because this is not a list where people get one answer and it's only one beer. And I think we see some of the dynamics from that in the list, and then some of those standbys that people might have as their third or fourth or fifth favorite beer that are just the things they always love to go to, they end up rating really high on this list, and so why don't we start at number 50, and that's Left Hand Nitro Milk Stout. Number 49, Founder's Backwoods Bastard. Number 48, Firestone Walker Union Jack IPA, which got a great brand refresh this year. 47 is Weihenstephaner Hefeweiss beer. 46, Old Nation, new to the list with M43 IPA. Number 45, an old favorite, Odell IPA. 44, Dogfish Head 120-minute IPA. Number 43, Sierra Nevada Torpedo. 42, another one from Sierra Nevada, Oktoberfest. And 41 is Pilsner Urquell Pilsner.
Yeah, the Pilsner.
The Pilsner.
The only Pilsner, really.
Really? The only one?
It's from Pilsen.
Yeah?
That's the Pilsner.
Is that what makes something a Pilsner? It has to be from Pilsen?
I'm not going to win that battle. I'm not going to say that. I will say you look in the Czech Republic, and if you make a pale lager outside of Pilsen, they don't call it Pilsner.
What do they call it?
Svedli Ležák. Pale lager.
All right.
Okay.
So at 40, New Belgium Voodoo Ranger. 39, Dogfish Head Sea Quench. 38, Deschutes Fresh Squeezed. 37, New Belgium Fat Tire Amber, an old school classic. 36, Great Lakes Edmund Fitzgerald Porter. 35, Bear Republic Racer 5 IPA. 34, The Alchemist Focal Banger. Number 33, Stone IPA. Number 32, Lawson's Finest Sip of Sunshine. 31 is Firestone Walker Peebo Pils.
Yeah.
Is that one a Pilsner, Joe?
It's a Pils. I'm not going to get into that, man. That's a great beer.
I agree. I drink a fair amount of that one. Number 30, Youngling Lager. Number 29, Founder's Canadian Breakfast Stout. Everyone loves that maple syrup. Number 28, Russian River Blind Pig, another one. 27, Dogfish Head 90-minute IPA. Number 26, New Holland Dragon's Milk. Number 25, Deschutes Black Butte Porter. 24, Ballast Point Sculpin IPA. That one's kind of tumbled down from a number 12 spot last year. 23, Toppling Goliath King Sue, new to the list. That's a pretty high debut for them.
Yeah, jumping in at 23 for sure.
That's some serious stuff from Toppling Goliath. Number 22, Boulevard Tank 7 Farmhouse Ale, another fantastic classic beer. 21, Treehouse Julius IPA. Number 20, Orval.
Yeah, and jumping from 40 to 20, it looks like. I think
it really did.
And seeing beers like Orval pop in here is so cool. And also down below, we mentioned Weihenstephaner Hefeweiss beer, because I think when a lot of people are filling out this list, they're not necessarily thinking of foreign beers. I think a lot of times they're thinking of American craft beers. They're getting this email from an American craft beer magazine. And so a lot of these probably are not top of mind for people. But when they're asked to put in their top 5, they're like, oh yeah, Weihenstephaner Hefeweißbier. Yeah, somebody, people did that. And Orval is enough people said that it's in there in top 20.
For sure. If you ever want to go through some excruciating pain, I suggest correcting everyone's different spellings of Weihenstephaner.
Thank you, Jamie, for doing that for us, for everyone.
Yes, little known fact, I spent 4 straight days cleaning up this data and using what I know about beer and these breweries just to make sure that when we sort and, again, kind of correct, that we could actually count these things accurately. It's insane. Three Floyds is number 19 with Zombie Dust Pale Ale. Number 18, Weldworks Juicy Bits IPA. Number 17, The Alchemist Heady Topper IPA. Number 16, North Coast Old Rasputin. One of those beers that I was drinking back in the mid to late 90s, back in some of those early days of craft beer. And it's still fantastic to see it getting some credit up here.
And it's available, I mean, it's like it's one of the,
Number 15, Sierra Nevada Celebration. Number 14, Cigar City High Lie IPA. Number 13, Toppling Goliath Pseudo Sue. Number 12, Sam Adams Boston Lager. Gosh, talk about a classic.
I think it's so cool that that's on there. I mean, there's a lot of people. The people who get this magazine they're savvy beer people, and in their top 5, they're like, oh yeah, Sam Adams Boston Lager. I mean,
if it's a beer you drink a lot of,
it's a beer that obviously a lot of geeks take it for granted, and it's the airport beer par excellence, at the airport bar. But for that, again, to like pop into people's mind is like, oh yeah, that's one of my top 5.
The next one's another one, similar kind of boat, Guinness, at number 11 with Guinness Extra Stout. Another classic, in the world of beer.
Yep.
Number 10, Founders All Day IPA. And number 9, Founders Breakfast Stout. Back-to-back 9 and 10 from Founders in 2 different styles of beer. Calling them a powerhouse, I think, would be underestimating it, because that's not the last Founders that we're going to hear on this list. Allagash before that with Allagash White. Wow, there's a classic high up there. Goose Island Bourbon County Stout at number 7. Number 6, Brasserie DuPont Saison DuPont. That is a really high placing.
It is.
For Saison DuPont. Number 6 overall.
I think and that's another, where was that last
Up from
year?
Number 18.
Okay, so that's another one, like Saison DuPont is top of mind for a lot of, and actually I'm surprised it's so much higher than Orval. For the people who are going to name a Belgian beer, more people said Saison DuPont than said Orval. And I think that's really interesting that has become such a, it is kind of for a lot of people, you ask them their favorite beer, that'd be a default beer. Oh, Saison DuPont. Yeah. And I think that's interesting that it's, 30 years on from when Michael Jackson wrote about it and Americans first learned about it, it is still growing in people's minds, this beer.
Well, it's become a paragon. It's become a model. You think about everybody who brews Saison in the United States, the very first question you ask is, what yeast are you using? And I guess I will guarantee you that at least 80 to 90% of the answers to that question are, DuPont yeast.
It's the archetype.
Right.
Yep.
Right. It is the model that all follow. And, what we found more often than not is those models tend to still be, remain people's favorite beers when they make beers that are similar to that and then taste their own beers. They are still drinking these things that inspire them and can, in some ways develop an even deeper appreciation for the quality of those beers that are inspiring them. Number 5, Founders Kentucky Breakfast Stout.
So that's not just, that's 4 or 5 Founders on the list, and 3 of the top 10 are Founders beers.
Yes, they are. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Number 4, this one shot way, way, way up the list. It was a 34 last year, and actually I think debuted on the list last year because it's a pretty new beer. Sierra Nevada Hazy Little Thing.
Obviously, with these top beers these are the ones that are people's minds. They have to be almost have to be widely available to be able to be the sort of people's regular go-to beers. But for that, in just a couple of years, it's we know it's a great beer. But to be able to do that, it really has to be a great beer.
That means it has to be a great beer. And that means they have to be able to get lots of it out there in a lot of places to a lot of people and build a brand familiarity around it, which, Sierra Nevada does because they have such a consistent reputation for quality across all the styles that they brew. Number 3, I feel like we need like a drum roll right here, but that is a perennial favorite at the top of all top lists, Russian River Pliny the Elder Imperial IPA. Number 2 is another one from Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada with 2 in the top 5. That's Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Not a huge surprise that it's up there. It tends to go neck and neck with the number one beer, which I'm sure everyone out there can figure out right now. And that is Bell's Brewery Two Hearted IPA. Bell's and Two Hearted have just kind of owned the top of a lot of these lists from us, from other magazines like Zymergy for the last few years. There's a deep-seated love for this beer.
It's a great beer, and there's just something about that trout. You know what I mean? Like you see that trout, and it's like, oh, there he is. I got to get some of that. And
sure.
Number 1 and 2 switched, right? I mean,
they did.
Pale Ale was top last year.
Pale Ale was top last year, and Two Hearted has taken back the crown.
Two Hearted unseated it.
Yeah. So let's pivot next, and we can talk about your favorite breweries by size. And we can start with the very large breweries, because there aren't that many of them. These are breweries over 500,000 barrels a year. And then number 5 was Lagunitas Heineken. Number 4, Boston Beer Company. Number 3, New Belgium Brewing. Number 2, Founders. Again, no surprise. Number 1, Sierra Nevada Brewing. Congratulations to all of them. There will be a nice trophy going out to Sierra Nevada for that. There will also be a trophy, of course, going out to Bell's for their Two Hearted. I should have mentioned that before. We have beautiful little trophies for all the winners that are also tap handles that they can, throw on a tap in a tap room.
That's why they do this, for the trophies.
Brewers love medals, Joe. Mm-hmm. Love medals. On the large breweries category, number 5, these are breweries from 100,000 barrels to 500,000 barrels a year. Deschutes at number 5 from Bend, Oregon. Dogfish Head, number 4. Number 3, Stone Brewing out of Escondido, California. Number 2, Firestone Walker. And number 1, Bell's Brewery. I suspect that Bell's will not be number 1 in this category for large breweries next year. And that is because as I was checking this data for the list, they are about 15,000 barrels away from the next higher category. So they are about to surpass the 500,000 barrel a year mark. And I imagine by next year, they will have done that.
Bell's will become a very large brewery.
Bell's will move up a category, and they'll be hidden in a heavier weight class then. Mm-hmm. We will see how that plays out for them. Mid-size breweries, these are 15,000 to 100,000 barrels per year. Number 5 is Three Floyds out of Munster, Indiana. Number 4, Trillium Brewing out of Canton, Massachusetts, and Boston and Fort Point. Allagash Brewing is number 3 from Portland, Maine. Number 2, Treehouse Brewing in Charlton, Massachusetts, continuing their meteoric rise over the last few years. That brewery is, I believe at last check, brewing over 50,000 barrels a year and selling every bit of it out of their brewery. Absolutely a force of nature. And number 1 in the mid-size brewery category, 15,000 to 100,000 barrels per year, Russian River Brewing out of Santa Rosa and Windsor, California. In the small breweries category, and again, we are just reading the top 5 of these categories. If you read the issue of the magazine, we actually track these about 20 deep in each of these categories. But, we have to give you some incentive to go read the magazine. And so go do that or subscribe today at beerandbrewing.com. Number 5 on the small breweries list. Kind of surprises me that a brewery this small has been able to kind of make it this high on a list, but it's Hot Butcher from the World from Chicago, Illinois.
One of the best brewery names in the country.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's a great name. Hot Butcher for the World. That's just a cool name.
Well, apparently...
I'm not saying that's why they're in the top 5 here.
Okay.
I'm just saying it is certainly a top 5 brewery name.
I don't disagree with you, and apparently they're making beer at Chicago is a pretty large metro area, and they've made a lot of favorite lists from people certainly in their area who have been voting hard for them. So they are number 5. And number 4 out of Brooklyn, New York, another large metropolitan area, Other Half Brewing. You can see there's a hazy IPA thing running through some of this top list. Although I say that, and now at number 3 we go a completely different direction with Jester King Brewery out of Austin, Texas. Number 2, speaking of hazy IPAs, Weldworks Brewing out of Greeley, Colorado, another brewery that's been growing crazy fast. And at number 1 for yet another year in a row, that's Hill Farmstead up in Greensboro Bend, Vermont.
No surprise there.
No surprise there. I certainly won't argue with that. Certainly one of my favorite breweries in the entire world. Before we talk about the next category, I just want to share that Hopsteiner is a vertically integrated global hops supplier dedicated to delivering the finest hops and hops products available. For 6 generations, Hopsteiner has partnered with breweries of all sizes, offering unique hop varieties and innovative hop products designed to enhance flavor, aroma, consistency, and flexibility for brewing and beyond. Learn more at hopsteiner.com. Also, balancing barley and hops is your expertise, and for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert, and when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION, that's 855-692-5274, or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the expert that experts trust. Let's move into who brews it best. This category we set up in order to celebrate and identify those breweries who may not make it into kind of less specific lists. This one is, we ask based on the type of beer that a brewery brews. And so we ask who your favorite American IPA brewer is, who your favorite hazy IPA brewer is, who your favorite sour wild ale brewer is, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go through some of the categories. And, I think we can start right down there with your favorite lager brewery. Joe, do you want to share favorite lager breweries with the people?
Yeah, sure. And number 5 would be Yangling, naturally. Number 4, Firestone Walker. I do like that Firestone Lager. Number 3, Bierstadt Lagerhaus in Denver. Number 2, Jack's Abbey. And number 1, Samuel Adams, Boston Beer Company.
That's interesting that a brewery like Bierstadt Lagerhaus could end up in the top 5 with 4 other breweries that massively package and distribute.
For sure,
and they do not.
It's interesting. That's how it's like they're in people's minds somehow, and people talk about them. And it's that slow pour pills.
I think we do have an interesting selection of brewers themselves who have filled out this reader survey.
who come to Denver at least once a year,
yes,
and have to go pay their respects to the slow pour pills. It's true.
So I think there's definitely some of that. For favorite pale ale brewers, number 5, Hill Farmstead. Number 4, Topple and Goliath, of course, pushing that Pseudo Sue. Number 3, Oscar Blues, and I imagine that's on the back of Dale's Pale Ale. Number 2, Three Floyds, makers of Zombie Dust. And number 1, Sierra Nevada, of course, with their iconic pale ale.
It's where they belong.
And I should also mention that, all the winners of these categories, or all the number 1 winners of each of these categories will also get some special trophies for that. Why don't you talk about favorite stout and porter brewers?
All right, here we go. Top 5 favorite stouter. Your top 5 favorite stout and porter brewers. Number 5, Goose Island. Number 4, Bell's. Number 3, Left Hand. 2, Guinness. Have you heard of them?
I think so.
And number 1, Founders.
Not a shocker. Back in the number 1 spot again. Guinness in the number 2 spot again. Left Hand again in number 3. Not a lot of movement in there in the top 3. And of course, well-deserved positions from brewers that all make fantastic beers in those styles. Favorite sour or wild ale brewer at number 5, new to the top 5, Side Project Brewing out of St. Louis, Missouri. They were number 10 last year, and now they are number 5. We're actually in St. Louis right now recording this. We've been out here all week filming online education for our learning platform at learn.beerandbrewing.com, a place where homebrewers and people that love to brew beer can learn from professional brewers and other instructors on the art and craft of brewing. We filmed some fantastic classes, and in fact, we are filming a class with Side Project in here in St. Louis tomorrow. Should be fun. Anyway, that's an aside. Number 4, Jolly Pumpkin, a major inspiration for a lot of the other American brewers on this list. Number 3, the Brussels Classic Cantillon, Brasserie Cantillon. Number 2, Crooked Stave out of Denver, Colorado. And number 1, moving up from the number 2 spot last year, Jester King Brewery out of Austin, Texas.
I think it's interesting again to me. I'm a Belgian beer guy. But where do the Belgian beers appear, and how much does that have to do with people not even realizing they could name a Belgian brewery? If we're talking about top wild sour, or maybe, and also Cantillon's hard to come by. And probably a lot of people.
I mean, Cantillon was number one last year. They're still in the top 3.
Okay,
it's not a bad position for him, Joe.
I'm not complaining. I'm more of a Dryfonteinen guy down here, number 13. So
that one, I think we will see it climb because the brewery has been ramping up production, and they are getting more beer out of the United States. And more people are able to taste and understand why we put Dryfonteinen, our Cuvée Armand Gaston, in our beers of the year last year, because it is literally one of the best beers I've ever tasted ever in the history of beer.
It's terrific. Yes,
it is.
And it will take a few years, but I think that will happen. Yeah,
I think it will. I can watch them climbing up next year. Let's move and talk a little bit about favorite Abbey style brewer.
Number 5 out of Fort Collins, Colorado, New Belgium. Number 4. Chimay, naturally. I mean, it's a Trappist brewery. It's so therefore Abbey style, sure. Number 3, Allagash. Number 2, West Vleteren. And number 1, Ommegang.
There you go.
Have enough people had a West Vleteren that it's up there for them?
Apparently enough have to move it into number 2.
That's great.
That was another one which you would be thrilled to watch how many different ways people spell that brewery name.
I mean, that's got to be better than how many different ways they say it. So
That's true. I'm trying to listen to you and copy you with your pronunciation.
I'm not sure I would do that, to be honest.
A slight twist on that. The next category is favorite Saison brewer. Number 5, Ommegang, back on the list here too. Number 4, Allagash. Number 3, Boulevard, of course, on the strength of Tank 7. Number 2, Hill Farmstead. And number 1, should be no surprise to anybody, Saison Brasserie DuPont. And I'm sure that is for their Saison DuPont and also their Avec le Bon Vin. Let's talk about favorite. Should we do American IPA brewer next? Which one is the top category here? Is it American IPA or is it hazy IPA?
I mean, let's go with the zeitgeist and let's save the hazy IPA for last, right?
I guess we can do that.
All
sure.
Right, here we go. Number 5 for favorite American IPA brewer, be Firestone Walker. Number 4, Sierra Nevada. Number 3, Bell's Brewery. 2 would be Stone. And number 1, Russian River. And here we have Russian River has unseated Stone from the number 1 spot here.
They have. If you're listening in and kind of counting in your head, there's a few medals here for a couple of breweries like Founders and Sierra Nevada, and I think that's number 2 now for Russian River. Let's shift. Favorite hazy IPA brewer, the top I shouldn't call it the top. It's the most hyped category by far, in craft beer right now. The number 5 spot for your favorite hazy IPA brewer is Weldworks Brewing. Number 4, The Alchemist. Number 3, Trillium Brewing out of Boston, Massachusetts, and others. Number 2, Sierra Nevada. In the number 2 spot.
Again, all on the strength of that hazy little thing.
All on the strength of hazy little thing. And in the number 1 spot, Treehouse Brewing out of Massachusetts. In the number 1 spot, once again. A little quick hit for the next category. That is a question that we pose to our readers. Where do you most often buy your favorite craft beer? We won't talk about the entire thing, but I just want to talk about the top entry in this list, and that is brewery. If we look at where people bought craft beer, even 2 years ago in 2017, a whole lot more people bought beer at a liquor store or a specialty beer store. Even more people bought beer at grocery stores. Now, over the last 2 years, since we asked this question in 2017, 2018, and 19, people who buy beer, their favorite craft beers at a brewery, has increased by 10 points on that scale. It's not understating it to say we're watching a major shift in the way that consumers even think about buying beer and are focusing on buying beer directly from breweries, whether that's to get the freshest experience, to get beers that they can't get out in other retail channels, whether it's to get specialty releases that are only sold at the brewery. I think it's a whole multitude of those kinds of reasons, or to make sure that they're getting the freshest beer that's in date code and that's been kept, cold stored, especially with styles like hazy IPA that tend to not do so well when they're not cold stored. For all of those kinds of reasons, I think a lot of these purchases are now shifting back and people are starting to be trained to purchase those beers directly from breweries.
I have to say, anecdotally to me, I'm actually probably that 10% myself. Dude, go into a tap room, you have a beer or two. I'm probably driving anyway, and I gotta stop there. But they have all these now, instead of far superior to growlers, you have these 12, 16 ounce cans you can walk away with, take them home, have them later, anytime. And I'm definitely buying a lot more beer from breweries directly than I used to.
We're going to talk a little bit about homebrewing next in the next two categories. The next two categories are both homebrew focused. First is homebrew brand of the year. And we'll talk about the top 10 in this category since it'll be fairly quick. At the number 10 spot, Braumeister and Spiedel. At the number 9 spot, Bayou. At number 8 spot, Tilt. The number 7 spot, Grainfather. Number 6 spot, Anvil, a brand owned by Blickman. Number 5 is More Beer. Number 4, Inkbird. Everyone loves those temperature controls, I guess. And number 3, Spike Brewing. The top 3 brands here are all makers of stainless steel for home brewers. So number 3 is Spike. Number 2, a name that everyone's familiar with, Blickman Engineering. And at the number 1 spot, SS Brewtech out of Southern California. Congratulations to the homebrew brands of the year. And now we'll move to top homebrew gear of the year. This is specific homebrew products, not brands. And the number 10 spot is the SS Brewtech Kettle. Number 9 spot, Robo Brew. Number 8, the Tilt Hydrometer. Number 7, SS Brewtech's Infusion Mash Tun. Number 6, the Spike Brewing Kettle. Number 5, Spike Brewing's Conical Unitank. Number 4, the SS Brewtech Unitank. Number 3, SS Brewtech Chronicle Fermenter. Number 2, SS Brewtech Brew Bucket. And at the number 1 spot, the Grainfather Connect. Why don't you jump into some of the highlights from your own personal critics list this year? I'm not going to get into all of it, but get the magazine. You can read all of our extremely valuable and worthy opinions. But just to hit a few highlights, a thing today's brewers ought to pay more attention to, foam stability. I see so many beers that are badly poured, and when they're poured correctly, you see that foam disappear. I just want to see some foam, man. I want to see it stay there. It's beautiful. I will take pictures of it. I will send those pictures to everyone who, I think, why are we seeing pictures of cans on social media and not beautiful glasses of beer with foam? Joe, that foam, it means that breweries are shorting their customers on beer volume.
The foam means that you have a brewer who knows how to brew and somebody who knows how to pour. And it adds pleasure to the experience. If you need room for the foam, get a bigger glass. It's to me, it's that simple. But a beer I want to mention is from Brasserie de la Seine in Brussels. There is a bit of a European bias in my picks. I mean, I've been living there for
But that's why we let you do this.
Okay.
Well, no, the entire point of these critics lists is not to all have the same list. We try to spread it out geographically. We try to spread it out a little bit gender and age wise. We try to kind of cross the map. And so, we've got Alex down in Southern California. We have Kate who's up in Montana. We have Stan who's down in Atlanta. We have you talking, from with this kind of European perspective. I'm there in the Rocky Mountains, but I travel all over the country, doing this kind of thing. And so, and everyone else does too. Stan's traveling around the world. Kate's traveling around the country. Alex, we're trying to take that kind of global view.
I don't apologize for my bias. I'm just owning it.
Okay. Cool.
The Brasserie de la Seine, so the Taras Bulba, I think at this point is a cult beer. A lot of people know that beer and will whisper about it reverently and so on. It's a really light, hoppy, gorgeous pale ale. One of my favorite beers in the whole wide world. But their beer that I got fixed on this past year that I never was fixed on before, even though I used to live in Brussels, is the Jambe de Bois, their triple. I never used to have time for triples. They were too strong. I kind of wanted to have more of a session type beer, but then I think as I've gotten older, I appreciate maybe that little more alcoholic kick. And the just big burst of noble hops in there combined with that strength and just enough malt sweetness. I just love that beer. And I know a handful of places in Brussels where I can get it on draft, and I'm not telling you where it is.
No,
those are for me.
Not the brewery itself.
They'll tell you. They'll probably tell you.
All right. Fair enough. Are there any other highlights that you want to talk about here?
Yeah, I had such a great time in Denver a couple of weeks ago. It was actually my first time in Denver. Like I said, I've been away. But the so many great places to go.
I take it for granted because I live an hour and away and I'm there all the time. But it's always interesting to hear it from someone else's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, oh yeah, it's totally worth the hype. It's when you have that experience, it's pretty cool. But the beer that I enjoyed the most there, which is certainly one of the beers I enjoyed most for the whole past year, was at the Hogshead Brewery that specializes in cask ale, and that Gilpin Black Gold, that London Porter, was so nice. Like creamy texture on it, nice rich malt to it, the little bit of roast, and just I really enjoyed every single gulp of that beer, that pint when I was sitting there, and it was just thoroughly enjoyable. That would be definitely one of my top beers of the year.
If you chatted up with Steven, the owner, you'd love it even more. He's a character, and I will have to talk to him sometime soon here on the podcast because he's absolutely hilarious and highly opinionated.
All right. my kind of dude.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. All right. It's time. It's time to jump into the pièce de résistance.
Hey, that was good. That was better.
Was that good? Was
Yeah.
that good? Can you give it to me in your proper French pronunciation?
The best 19 beers of 2019.
So to pick these, the place we start for this list is with our top scoring beers of the year. Throughout the year in the magazine, which of course you read because of course you subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. And if you don't, you've already gone to beerandbrewing.com and you've clicked on the subscribe button to subscribe. You will see, because if you are a subscriber, you also have full access to all the back issues from the start of the magazine, all available digitally to you on the apps and through the website. But I digress. You will see that, of course, we review beers in specific styles in every issue of the magazine, and we try to go deep, and we do all of our tasting with a blind panel of BJCP certified judges here for actually BJCP certified or certified Cicerone and certified Cicerone, judges who have gone through some training and some testing to make sure that they understand beer and they know what they're tasting. We hold those tasting sessions. Again, they are done blind. The reviewers do not know what they're tasting, and those take place both in Denver and in Fort Collins, Colorado. And so we move through that and we score beers that way. The only beers you see with scores in our magazine have been tasted blind and have been scored that way by these judges. And so we pick we take a look at some of those highest scores and most notable scores, and those, is one criteria for inclusion on this list. We, also because, due to timing and the way that things work out, it's not always possible for brewers to send us what beers that we should consider at the specific times that we're reviewing those things for the magazine. And so we also put out a review call before this Best in Beer issue, and brewers send us more beers. This time around, they sent us, I think we received over 500 beers submitted for this issue, for the Best in Beer issue, as kind of a cleanup for stuff we hadn't considered earlier in the year. In addition to that, we taste beers in the kind of places and spaces that don't lend themselves to kind of blind reviews. We don't want to knock those beers out of contention. They're just as a different standard for trying to consider and include those. Anyway, we, Joe and I, and all the folks at Craft Beer Brewing put our heads together and talk about those beers that have been impactful for us, those beers that have scored high, those beers that have really speak to a zeitgeist for the year of 2019 in some way or another. And we've put together what we consider a list of our top beers of 2019. And so to that end, let's talk about these top 19 beers, Joe.
Yeah, let's talk about them.
Why don't you start it off, since I've been talking a lot, with one that you have written about in this new Best in Beer issue and done an extensive profile of.
Well, this is a beer that when I have a handful of friends that when they find out about this, they're gonna laugh because they know how I feel about this beer. I would marry this beer, but that's not why it's here. It's that didn't hurt, but you talked to brewmaster like Matt Brittleson or Yvonne DeBetz, and Yvonne said this is for him the best Pilsner in the world. We're talking about the Schönramer Pils out of Schönram, Bavaria in Germany. The brewmaster there, Eric Toft, originally from Wyoming, but wears lederhosen 5 days a week and speaks fluent Bavarian dialect. We do have a big feature package on him, a big feature article on him in this article in this issue. This is not just a Pils. it is a Pils that is packed with juicy Tettnanger flavor, and it is on the rather bitter end of the spectrum for a German Pilsner. And for me, it was kind of my daily bread for a long time when I was living in Germany. So I'm very familiar with the beer, and it's one of those things where it's got so much character, and yet it doesn't demand anything of you. You can sit there and have another and another while talking, and it doesn't intrude. It doesn't, it's just, anyway, the Schönrammer Pils is one of our best 19 beers of the year.
It's interesting because Schönrammer was mentioned to me when I was out in Windsor, California earlier this year, recording podcast and going to visit Vinny and Natalie Chilurzo at Russian River Brewing. And Vinny mentioned to me that it was his visit to Schönrammer and spending some time with Eric down there that inspired him to install open fermenters at the new brewery in Windsor, California. And so seeing the sphere of influence that Eric Toft has had on some of the world's best brewers, it's well deserved, and it's a certain credit to him and the talent and skill that he's applied to this.
I think we should say it's not widely distributed in the U.S. There's no reason it couldn't be more long term.
If you live out on the West Coast, it's more readily available. There is an American importer, and it is possible for for folks that would like to get it, and more of it should be brought to the United States. Although, that's not like they have a whole ton of beer more to ship over here.
Ask your best shops, and maybe they can get it if they don't have it already.
I just botched my natural segue to the next beer on our top beers of 2019.
Did I botch your segue?
I botched it. I'm going to own that one, right? It's no. When I was just mentioning, Russian River, that visit out there to Russian River, in that moment, in fact, I think people could probably listen to it on the podcast if you rewind and go back and listen to to that episode. I think it's episode 85 or 85 or 86 of the podcast, where Vinny shared a certain beer with me, and that was Russian River Intinction Sauvignon Blanc, which is also among our top 19 beers of 2019. This beer really caught me in a very specific way. We've definitely been following the wine beer hybrid trend. We wrote about it in last year's Best in Beer issue. We've been following this, and I've had fantastic beers made like this, from everyone from Jester King to Rare Barrel to Trillium and others. Lots and lots of folks making really interesting, really clever, smart, well-designed beers that kind of span that that kind of beer wine space. This beer, Sauvignon Intinction Sauvignon Blanc, occupies a special space. It's very possible with these wine grape beers to go overboard. Wine grapes produce a lot of alcohol. They can have very strong flavors, and those flavors can turn everything into a non-beer direction. This Intinction Sauvignon Blanc has a very soft acidity. The fermentation was so beautifully controlled. The wine grape was nuanced, subtle. Acidity was very tightly considered and well placed within the beer without overwhelming it. On that note, if you are a sour beer consumer, this is the kind of nuance and subtlety in an American sour beer that we should be striving for. There is a lot of American sour beer out there, and a lot of consumers that demand American sour beer that is far too acidic, that is far too heavy-handed, that is far too ham-fisted in the way that it kind of approaches acidity for acidity's sake, and does not necessarily celebrate the kind of delicate and nuanced balance that a beer like Intinction Sauvignon Blanc does. And so I hope that more people, and more brewers and more beer fans see the beauty in these kinds of nuanced beers and strive, to make them more like this.
I drank this beer while we were working on finishing this magazine, sitting in my office, and I think I swiped a bottle from the office while I was visiting. I'm a big fan of, I know this isn't the grape that's involved here, but I'm a big Riesling fan, and I like Alsatian Riesling, and I like the drier ones with that acidity. And so a beer that brings out that acidity even more, and along the way doesn't put a foot wrong anywhere, and it finishes dry enough that you want a little bit more and a little bit more. And it's so rare to find something like that. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it and found no reason to write arguments to you about why it should not be in the best 19 beers of the year.
There's something to be said for being right there, in the middle of wine country in Northern California and having access to some of the best grapes, having access to some of the best grape processors, and so great raw materials help make great beer. But there is also a brewers and blenders art to making sure that all of these things occur as they should, and that the end product, achieves that kind of ideal that they're searching for. And so this beer does it all. Next beer on our list, we're going to go completely in the other direction from soft and nuance. Lawson's Finest Triple Sunshine. This is a beer that our blind panel pushed onto this list because it scored a 99. For whatever reason, I have this mental idea that I like smaller beers because they're more drinkable and you drink more of them, makes more sense. Who drinks these big things? And yet at the same time, every time I drink some of these triple IPAs, I absolutely love them.
I find a lot of times the double and triple IPAs, to me, are more drinkable than the regular IPAs or the hazy IPAs because there's more malt in there and it's often more balanced.
I get it. And so, even though I have this mental idea of what I like and what I think I like, every time I drink these, I am completely shocked at how well it works. This beer, and there are others like it, are pushing a new ID and a new vision for West Coast IPA, where bitterness is down. We're talking about more late hops additions in these beers. We're pushing some fruit flavor up. They've still got a strong malt component. They've still got a strong bitterness component. Definitely a little bit, a little bit more, strong on that kind of citrus and tropical element too. And it just makes for a more pleasant beer that still finishes dry, even though it's this big. And they just become fantastic experiences. We're going to stay on the, blind panel IPA tip for a minute here. The next beer on this top 19 is from a very small brewery out in Wilmington, North Carolina, called New Anthem. And the beers that made this list in this spot were their Songs Unsung and Steez IPAs.
It's a twofer.
I love cheating on this list all the time, and you'll know.
So it's really like the best 23-ish. Okay.
We'll give that one spot. But here's the thing, though. When a brewery is making a whole bunch of beers that may only show up once, and they may only make it once, does it make sense to only mention that beer?
No, it's a good point. Yeah, the point is to look for the next beer like these two.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so, this is a funny one. When I put it in front of our blind panel, I didn't know what to think. Again, it's a small brewery. We'd had some beer from them before. It had gotten oxidized in shipping. And I could tell when I tasted it, like this wasn't the way they intended it to taste, this prior shipment. So this one came in and I had this idea, I hope this one's better than the last batch, but I didn't know how it's going to taste. We put it in front of the blind panel. And I made sure to align it so we had, two portions of the panel. Each were drinking a New Anthem beer, but a different one. And it came through it, and you just see it on the faces of our blind judges. Like, they just lit up. And this is in the middle of a long flight of IPAs, which, to be honest, if you've ever judged IPAs in any kind of competition, it is a pain in the ass. It is a literal. You are slogging through it and try to keep your palate in some sort of shape to be able to differentiate between these beers, especially as you get deeper into it. So, here you are in the middle of a panel, and these beers just lit up the room on both sides. And it was an amazing thing to watch amongst other great beers in the same flight. Very high scoring, fantastic beers. They just head and shoulders standouts. I love nothing more than being blown away, having my expectations crushed by something where I thought it was going to be okay, and it just blows me away. There was nothing more fun than to have to eat crow about that and to admit, hey, I was completely wrong in my, my misplaced expectation about this. And so kudos to New Anthem for being able to make a beer where the quality of ingredients is conveyed, the process, was extremely tight, and the beers themselves were big and bold and strong and bright and just express this hops character with such a beautiful clarity despite their haze.
There you go.
And then the next on the list is another IPA. This one is Parish Brewing, Ghost in the Machine from Broussard, Louisiana. That brewery has blown up and have been on a skyrocketing trajectory. And this beer is one of the reasons that they've done it. It's a fantastically well-made hazy IPA, spicy lemongrass undertone, bold cantaloupe and peach on the nose. And they've been able to do this and scale this in a way where they've maintained that kind of quality to the beer. And so I've been thrilled by it, and it's fantastic to have them in our top 19.
I think it's odd that we have three. I think it actually is odd that we have three IPAs in a row here, because I think the 19 we have quite a diverse quite a diverse list of different kinds of beer, believe it or not. But they just happen to be grouped here together, and
they do,
and through merit, obviously. And so yeah, it's not going to be 14 more IPAs.
No. Yeah. It's not 14 more IPAs. In fact, the very next beer goes completely in the other direction.
Yeah, so out of Kansas City, Missouri, the KC Beer Helles. A Helles made the top 19 of the year. And this was something that this is not a widely distributed beer. They did send bottles to the office. I didn't know that. I was hanging out at the lake in Southwest Missouri, and it was available, and I was drinking a lot of it. First, I was reaching for the pills, but I also grabbed the Helles. And then I found when I went back, I thought I would go for the pills, but I was like, more of that Helles. And then I want a little more of that Helles, and then I kept drinking the Helles. A few weeks ago in the office, we did a little blind tasting with some of the top pale lagers and Helles and things, and this was my favorite blind, and I didn't know what it was. And I think that what they're doing in Kansas City at KC Beer, they're doing decoction brewing, they're doing natural carbonation, they're doing spunding, and all. They're doing it as traditionally as possible. It's very convincing traditional German beer. Maybe they're not breaking new ground in that way, but there definitely seems to be a thirst for that kind of thing in different places. Their Dunkel is doing very well in Kansas City and in that half of Missouri. So it's I think we're going to see this brewery get bigger and go places.
We've received a lot of beer from them over the course of the last year or two. Everything has been spot on, fantastic renditions. And I think that kind of, consistency and quality also weighs in on how, we make some decisions around these. When we have a brewery has one a phenomenal standout beer, but then we have some beers that maybe not as strong as those, then that can affect our overall perception of a brewery and whether, we make that kind of selection for this kind of list. Everything that KC Beer has sent to us has been phenomenally well executed, beautiful beer. And there you go. You got a Helles on the list, Joe.
I think it's interesting that their Dunkel is selling like crazy in Kansas City. It's the beer that built their brewery, but the bestseller by far at their beer garden is the Helles.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Next beer on the list, again, completely back in the other direction again. Other Half, HDHC, all green everything. Here we go with triple IPAs again. I don't know how to explain it other than to say that I drank a lot of Other Half triple IPAs. I didn't intend to drink a lot of Other Half triple IPAs this year. But part of it, came down to, I somehow bought some, 4 packs of some beers, and they just happened to be triple IPAs, but they sat in my fridge for a long time. And I found that these beers, even though they are quote unquote hazy IPAs and fragile and you got to drink them fresh and blah, 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 I could drink these beers 3 and 4 months later and they still tasted great. There's something about the centrifuge and production process and tight, low oxygen environment that they're brewing these beers in order to maintain that kind of longevity that really should be celebrated. And so a beer like this was big and bright and, specifically all green everything. There are other beers from them that are more highly rated by beer nerds, and that's okay. But this beer in particular, was not just a sweet citrus bomb. It was a well-nuanced, thoroughly kind of, had weird rough edges to it, in terms of some kind of funky green fruits and, some kind of, weird and big diesel notes, which it's like a little sweatiness, which I find fascinating and I love in some of these IPAs because, again, it gives it layers of complexity and other kinds of flavors to latch onto. And, of course, they've created a new acronym for this, HDHC, which describes some process where they're using cryo hops, more advanced hops products as well.
Well, we don't have enough acronyms. We need more acronyms, really.
The beer world definitely needs more acronyms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so for the acronym alone, there you go, other half in our top 19 of 2019. Fantastic beer, fantastic brewery, and one that is engaging in very highly technical processes and doesn't get enough credit for, the care and focus that they're putting into making sure that these beers are also technically capable as well as, creatively fulfilling. Next on the list, Modern Times. And as I tried to dig into this, I looked back at those Modern Times stouts that I've had, and I think I had at least 7 or 8 different Modern Times barrel-aged stouts over the past year. And I think I list some of them here in the review, which we'll have to read by subscribing to Craft Beer Brewing magazine at beerandbrewing.com. But this is another case where they, these beers become ones and dones. They release a special release. They don't make it the next year. Again, lifting one beer up at the expense of the others just seems to not really celebrate the overall quality of the entire program. And with these barrel-aged stouts, every single barrel-aged beer I've had from them, and I mean, you could add, clean non-barrel-aged beers into that too, have been excellently executed, beautifully constructed, just, so thorough and thoughtful in the way that the flavors are added into the beers, the way that the barrel, the base beers are complementing the barrel character, the way those adjuncts are selected. And I think the other big thing, which has been a big one for me this year, is despite adjunct laden beers with lots and lots of culinary flavors in them, they never lose sight of the beer. There's still a strong roasty base to these beers. Even though there might be an intense, sweetness in some of these adjuncted stouts, there is still a nice, solid, firm bitterness throughout the beer that kind of helps bring that sweetness back down. That allows you that pleasure, but also kind of adds a little bit of honesty to it at the same time. And so you'll find in all of these beers that I really find to be the best in their class, they have this kind of, they may be sweet, they may be, high finishing gravity beers, but if they've got those other elements, whether that's some hops bitterness or whether that is, a nice solid roast bitterness, something to kind of clean those beers so they're not just giant cloying messes, that is a huge differentiator, in the scale of quality on these kinds of things. To me, these beers that are too sweet without that just taste flat. They just taste like this big pancake that just kind of spreads over with no real definition to it. There's no character. There's no contrast, and I think that's where the real fun and excitement comes out of these kinds of beers. It has to have that contrast. Modern Times barrel-aged stouts do, and for that, they are in our top 19.
So the next one on the list is Beechwood Funk Yeah and Cool Ship Chaos. No, again, it's a twofer.
It is.
Okay.
You know why? Both of those scored 100 with our blind panel in our issue where we covered wood-aged sour beers earlier this year.
Well, I don't need to hear the 100 because I heard my man Carl Kins, the Belgian beer judge, Belgian beer critic, rave about the Beechwood sours. And I've never heard Carl Kins rave about an American brewed Belgian style or sour beer before. And so when he was saying that, I knew that there was onto something. Unfortunately, it was too late for me to go over to the booth at GABF and get some for myself. But it's definitely on my list, and it's got the Carl Kins seal of approval. So and he and I are tough on this kind of thing. So I'm and the blind panel. I mean, okay, yeah, sure.
You can listen if you really want to know more about how Beechwood goes about their sour beer process. You can listen to the episode of the podcast that I did with Harrison McCabe, the head of their barrel program, a few episodes ago. Needless to say, these beers capture that kind of traditional Belgian sour beer taste. They do it in a different way that still has a personality that's all their own, and they do it in an environment in Southern California where one should not necessarily be able to make spontaneous beer, and yet they control a lot of environmental factors in order to do that. And they have very thoughtfully and carefully considered their programs so that their cultures produce the kinds of flavors that they're looking for. It's very cool. The beers are a delicious example of what that kind of thoughtful approach to making American sour beer can be, especially again as you control acidity and are focusing on the overall gestalt of all of these elements, the funk and the Brett, the acidity, and the kind of other flavor notes, the kind of fruity Brett character that can also go along with some of these other and build these kinds of layers of fun to these American wild and sour beers. Next beer on the list, Joe.
That'd be so I was surprised by this, and I shouldn't be surprised by this. It comes from one of the oldest breweries in the world. Depends how you count these things, and depends how much you buy into their whole mythology. But the Weihenstephaner Korbinian is their Doppelbock, and I think people are more familiar with with their Hefeweiss beer, their Hefeweiz and their wheat beer, which is absolutely world class, tip top. It's a perfect beer. But everything that they do is basically perfect. The Helles, their Pils is fantastic, and so go figure. Their Doppelbock is also basically perfect. And so the reason this is on the list, it's not because I've been living in Germany for 5 years and I'm saying, hey, let's get this cool Doppelbock on here. No, it wasn't me that put this list on this list. It was the blind panel doing the Doppelbock tasting, and they gave this thing a really high score because it is a great beer.
It was the tops in its category,
and it is. I think even in Germany, it's hard to find a Doppelbock this good, where it packs so much malt character in there, and yet it's just bitter enough to hold it all together. But it finishes so softly and easily, and it's so dangerously easy to drink. And it can, it packs all that character in there, and then you can have another. It's got that caramel, that malt has almost a Tootsie Roll type flavor to it, and it's just, but it's not a sweet beer. It has sweetness, but it's not a sweet beer. It is very perfectly balanced. It's harmonious. It's round. And it's one to maybe revisit if you get to the bottle shop and you're want to reach back to the old world for something really tasty. The Korbinian is there for you, and that's
you think these beers because you had them years ago, and they may have fallen off your radar because you haven't had them in a few years because they're not the hottest and sexiest and newest kinds of things out there, But it is amazing, and I love seeing when our blind panel tastes these beers again, not knowing what they are. And, in an objective way, without the kind of bias of brand, can taste them and acknowledge why these beers have attained that kind of classic status, reaffirm that in some kind of sense. This is that beer. It's absolutely phenomenal, and everyone should be trying it again.
After you told me this was going to be on the list because of the blind panel scores, I went and bought a bottle and brought it home and drank it. It was such a joy. It was like, yeah, that's really good.
Next on the list is a little more of a new school approach, something that actually caught me way off of guard. Jester King Modern Dansk. Jester King is no stranger to our top beer list. They've appeared on their top 19 before. Certainly, you've heard our readers celebrate them in our Readers' Choice Awards. This beer, I didn't know what to make of it when they sent it our way, and but I was familiar with Frederiksdal, the cherry winemaker in Denmark, and so I opened up a bottle and tried it, and it was a beer that I kept going back to, and I didn't know why I kept going back to this beer, and so I had to continue to think about it each time I had it, and there's a depth and a nuttiness to the cherry component in here that, both at the same time felt like a creek. It felt like that kind of deep and rich Northern European, cherry beer, in that it still had that full beer character, but there was such an interesting depth to the cherry notes in this that were so compelling that that I continued to go back to it, and I swear to you, I've had at least 4 bottles of this over the last several months. Even though I'm not really a fruit beer person, I would much more readily drink a non-fruited sour beer. It was that kind of oddly compelling act that just drew me magnetically to this beer.
It's such a cool trend, I think, this Danish cherry wine influence. I mean, we obviously have the wine beers are kind of growing a little bit, and we have cherry beers. We have cherry beers, have had them for a long time, but this is sort of this, and I think there is some inspiration from Belgian Creek, from cherry lambic, but that sort of drawing out that sour cherry character and making it dry enough. And
due to their relationships, this beer was aged in Frederiksdal used barrels that housed Frederiksdal cherry wine, and so that combination of brewing a beer with the Stensbar cherries and then aging that in barrels that held the Frederiksdal cherry wine, just produced, and with Jester King's culture, it just did some magical things. It's a beer that everyone should be seeking out and trying if you're into cherry beers, and even if you're not, because I think it holds its own. Whether you think of it as a cherry beer, I mean, there are vinous notes in it, there are nutty notes in it. I mean, it is so thoroughly complex to be utterly fascinating. Next beer on the list, Off Color Brewing out of Chicago, Illinois, a beer called Miscellanea Volume 2. When I was up there earlier this year in Chicago, John Laffler shared some of these bottles with me and sent me home with some, and told me the story about them. The story was they've brewed a number of collaborations with a number of breweries, and they thought, it might be interesting to push all the various cultures, because when they brew a mixed culture collaboration with another brewery, take a little bit of their culture, a little bit of the other brewery's culture, put it together, ferment a beer with it, and it's ostensibly this combination of the two cultures, which produces this this other thing, that's somewhere between or even greater than the sum of those parts. Well, they took all of those various cultures, from these various collabs, and combined them together into a almost metacultural collab, which conceptually, again speaking, was such a fun and interesting idea. This kind of super group of cultures, built from all of these various breweries, and that's fun. An idea itself is great. If it doesn't make a good beer, then none of that matters. A good story is one thing, but a great beer is another thing. And this also produced a great beer.
What did it taste like? I want to know.
I got kind of a musty Vangin nose, with that kind of like dried, orange peel, a little bit of aspen bark, aged sherry, some kind of, woody tannic mid tones. It's the other piece of it, which I thought is fascinating, is like these sour beers are very dry beers because these cultures will eat through everything. And yet the beer presents very sweet. There is a character to it that like suggests to your mind this kind of wide and round fruit character, maybe even a little bit of pineapple in there and citrus, even though it's that dry. And so, this kind of beer that tastes like something, even though that kind of sweetness is not there in the beer, it becomes a fascinating thing for me. But it provides those kinds of depths and layers, to explore through a beer. And this one, you can just dig down and keep digging and keep digging. Fascinating. Not just as a deep math problem that's difficult to solve, but also as a beer that's soft in acidity, that's delicate, nuanced, and balanced. All of these buzzwords that we love about sour beer today, but made by artful creators that are doing it intentionally. And love it.
I think that's a good segue into our next one, actually.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Speaking of artisans going at this in a very delicate but also smart and intentional way, Crooked Stave Artisan Beer Project Sour Rosé. Again, our blind panel loved this beer. And what I found particularly remarkable about this is that Crooked Stave has kind of taken a stance to make this style of beer less precious, that kind of beer that is more accessible, to make wood-aged sour beer something that doesn't need to be only opened at bottle shares with your beer nerd friends, but is something that you can drink on a day-to-day basis and enjoy. Being a canned wood-aged sour beer with real fruit, and tasting with that kind of, delicately, nuanced acidity and beautifully expressed fruit character in something that's just eminently drinkable was a really, really fun experience. Our judges rated it highly. The more that we drank it this year, the more it just kept sticking out as one of those beers that is a special thing and that really deserves note for what they're doing and trying to make that wood-aged sour beer more accessible. They're kind of following that New Belgium model of making La Folie, in larger batches and pushing it out there and making sour beer for the people. This one does it also by kind of capturing that zeitgeist around rosé and producing something that is beer but with fruit that hits that that kind of rosé with the acidity that drinkers that want that are expecting out of it, kind of soft and gentle acidity and a light fruit character, a beautiful color, and they just nail it.
And the can really stands out on the shelves, and there's the whole canned cocktail culture as well going on, and I think there's overlap there with rosé, and I think it's just one of those. Not everybody who's walking through the beer aisle intends to buy beer, but that might catch their eye, and then you can get new fans with that kind of thing.
Not all beer, and especially not all sour beer, needs to be sold and marketed to the same market of beer geeks. This is a sour beer made by authentic, intentional creators that is marketed and very cleverly aimed at a different kind of beer drinker. And it's awesome to see that. There is not one beer drinker in this world. There are lots and lots and lots of different beer drinkers. It's fascinating to go into their tap room and find different kinds of demographics, different kinds of gender groups, everyone is enjoying these beers and coming at it from different perspectives. And, this is a beer that is for lots and lots of people and not a very narrow slice of the beer nerd market. I love it. Next on the list is another top scorer for our blind panel, Foothills Brewing Torch Pilsner out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
We got another Pilsner on the list.
We do. Is it a trend, Joe? Is this the year the lager breaks?
Well, craft Pilsner is one of the top 5 favorite beer styles of our readers, so maybe.
It is. I don't know if there's a ton that we can actually say about this, but other than you should read the review in Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, you should read our write-up on this. It is a beautiful, tight, well-constructed, they call it a Czech lager. We certainly have our own, opinions about how people define things like Czech or German and how those things need to fall.
I think there may be, I'm coming around to this idea that there may be an American Czech lager style, where basically the way that an American craft brewery might make a Czech lager is to throw a bunch of Saaz hops in it and not necessarily follow the whole elaborate decoction method and get that residual sweetness. And the American brewers obviously tend to avoid diacetyl as well as much as they can, whereas Czech brewer can tolerate a bit of that.
Sure.
So this is the sort of cleaner, thinner, crisper. There it is. Yeah,
you got there.
But I mean, I tasted it in the office, and it's if I was and I did get to judge German Pilsners and GABF this year, and if I'm sitting there judging a beer like that, it's going to do very well because it just hits the right notes. It's balanced. It's got good flavor. It's clean. It's a great beer.
Perfectly clean, but a nice character to it too. And that's the piece.
Well, it has enough hops.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that I think that really helps. I think I'm shocked how many times I see a brewery in the States saying they're making a Czech Pilsner and then it's got like 12 or 18 IBUs. Like, come on, man, you crank that up past 30. Give us some hops. I mean, Czech beer is hoppy. Give us some hops. Especially, you need a lot of Saaz if you want to taste the Saaz. You got to put a lot of Saaz in there.
Speaking of hops and lots of hops, the next one, Pint House Pizza, double dry hopped green battles out of Austin, Texas. I mean, Pint House, you have certainly heard of them. They've won every award they could possibly win over the last couple of years, from Alpha King to World Beer Cup to the Great American Beer Festival. In fact, Green Battles, the non-double dry hopped version of this beer, has in 2018 won in both American IPA in the World Beer Cup and American IPA at the Great American Beer Festival. So us giving it this honor is small compared to that kind of double honor from the World Beer Cup and from the Great American Beer Festival. But as we tasted this beer, we understood why. This is, again, like, with Lawson's that we mentioned earlier, this is the evolution of that American West Coast style IPA. This is that kind of, lower bitterness, tropical fruit forward, East Coast, kind of fruitiness meets West Coast, dry and dank, and meets somewhere in the middle. It's not hazy. It definitely is unfiltered. It's a cloudy beer, not a hazy beer. But the beauty of it is when you taste it, it just doesn't, it tastes like something else entirely, some sort of different category that's somewhere between these kinds of things, big and strong and dry, but also so heavily, fruit forward, that it just, that fruit itself kind of gives it a little more, softness and accessibility. Making a beer like this that is so flavorful despite its size is remarkable. And, Joe Morfeld and their team at Pint House have just become masters in brewing these kinds of IPAs. And so they've been recognized by plenty of others. This is our nod. They deserve it. It's fantastic.
I think this is cool that this next one is on here too. And it is, we talked before how it's climbed in the list of people's favorite beer, but Allagash White out of Portland, Maine, it's become one of those foundational craft beers. It's up there now in the, that handful that people talk about as a favorite with Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and I think it's exciting to see a wit beer, a Belgian wit beer, which, by the way, Belgians hardly even drink wit beer anymore. I mean, the Hoegaarden, of course, is everywhere, but as a style, it's fallen out of fashion in Belgium. But meanwhile, a beer that's very reverently brewed, following that sort of Pierre Celis style, and I think fine-tuned nicely over the years as well, and gone from strength to strength. And so my take on it is it's a little spicy for what I like, but I love that acidic edge to it, that light acidity that makes it so quenching and drinkable. And I think that's why people keep going back to it. That's why I'm always happy to drink it if I see it on tap.
Our blind panel again this year, rated at 98. It's easy to again think that we've had these beers in the past. We know what they taste like, and we kind of forget how they hit us. That first time, or that time where, we don't know what we're drinking and it's just a revelation in a glass. But that is this beer. And that's why it has earned its spot right here on the list. Next up, we're going to shift into some stout territory again. Sun King Shadowproof. Let me tell you about Sun King's barrel aging program. These guys are crushing it, and I don't think that they get enough recognition for just how creative and interesting their barrel aging program is. It's easy enough to build a barrel aging program around the pastry stouts and big sweet things, and make a generally soft but high gravity and a high finishing gravity thing, and then just add a whole bunch of flavors to it and then make it a barrel aged beer. It's hard to you can cover up a lot of the flaws in a beer that way and just make a kind of thing. Sun King has gone a different direction. They have won a number of medals now for their Magpie Muckle, which is a wee heavy aged in mead barrels, kind of a different approach. I can't tell you another brewery that makes a beer like that, and it's a phenomenal beer. In fact, that was very close to making this list as well. But Shadowproof, as we drank it, kind of embodied this old school meets new school approach that I found so refreshing. It tasted to me a bit like that kind of old Rasputin style, darker, more bitter, more strong, more assertive stout, but filtered through this kind of sweeter barrel program. And, the result was refreshingly delicious and beautifully balanced. And so, we drank a lot of stouts through this process, narrowing these beers down, and that one was just an utter standout for me. And so there it is on our list.
I'm really, I have to say, now that I see this on the page, I'm excited, to see these guys on here. And it's I've been writing about these guys since before they got their brewery going. This is out of St. Louis, Missouri. Civil Life's American Brown Ale is one of our best 19 beers of 2019. And it's something that, I don't know, we were in an Uber last night and we asked the driver, Well, he knew where he was going. He's like, we were going to Civil Life, and he said, "Oh, that's the best brewery in St. Louis." And then he said he hadn't been there in a long time, but it was still like it's there for him, and I know why. It's because you go into bars and restaurants up here and you see the Civil Life brown ale. It's everywhere, and people go to it. It's a go-to beer, and I think we have learned why. And you tell me what you were telling me. Tell them what you were telling me about last year.
A few years ago, John Bolton and I, John, co-founder of Craft Beer Brewing and CEO of Unfiltered Media, we launched this magazine back in 2014. In 2015, we came out for a convention in the St. Louis area, and we'd popped into a side project to the side project cellar and had a beer in there and noticed that they had a beer from Civil Life on cask, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. I love cask ale. I'd like to seek this out. And so we were brewery hopping and going around to a few different places that night, and we went to Four Hands, went to a few other places, and we'd Ubered over to Civil Life and like, okay, let's go check it out. We'll just go have a beer, and then we'll pop into the next spot and keep our kind of tour going. Well, that was the end of the night. We ended up at Civil Life, and it was such a revelation to experience that tap room, to sit in there and feel so comfortable, to be drinking these beers that were generally all under 6%.
Most under 5.
Most under 5,
yeah.
Right? These wonderful, flavorful, low ABV, sessionable beers that we could just drink one after another of and not get, drunk while doing it. Go back in the back hallway, play some darts, just chill out, de-stress, and enjoy, each other's company, and this kind of, just sheer enjoyment where the beer is so delicious, but not the star of the show. It is, and I think there is value to these beers that don't need to be in the spotlight. These beers that are just so utterly well crafted that they facilitate the rest of your life, and they don't demand that attention, and they don't, you just enjoy consuming them, and you enjoy the company of people, and that beer is such a perfect experience, and it never draws you out of that experience.
We mentioned earlier about Bierstadt in Denver, about how the brewers always have to go there. Talk to the brewers around here about where they have to go, and a lot of brewers around here love to go to Civil Life and drink these like perfectly nailed low alcohol classic styles. Why the brown? My favorite there isn't even the brown; it's the English bitter, which wasn't on tap when we were there last night. But what I love about the brown is that hop character to it. Actually, and it somehow mingles with the fermentation character, and you get this like herbal, tobacco, earthy streak to it that's really interesting, besides like this nice round malt that's never too sweet, and it finishes dry enough that you can have a pint and another pint, and it's a pleasure.
I finished a couple of pints of American Brown among other beers there also last night. And, it never gets old. It never gets old. There are not a lot of brown ales out there in America where I drink it and I instantly want to drink another one and then another one after that. And this is that kind of beer, right? That hops character is beautifully placed. Kind of, there's a sweetness to it, and that hops just dries that out in the finish, makes it drinkable sip after sip after sip. It's just.
And you told me this was almost on the list last year and got nudged out. And this year,
it's been close.
Yeah.
It's been a contender, and these are always difficult decisions, and certainly our experience of it. And I think at the same time as the brewery has moved from mobile canning to their own in-house canning, that their packaging program has improved, and I think that has improved our experience of that beer when they ship those beers out for us to evaluate. And so I think that could have been the difference this year, and how it just struck us, because I know what beer it's been. I've tasted it at the brewery before over the years, being able to then share it with others in the office and all being able to agree that this is a thing that should be a thing,
Yep.
There it is. So we're on to our last beer. of the top 19 beers of 2019. And that beer is Cerebral Brewing, Denver, Colorado, Vanilla Rye Here Be Monsters. We've watched this beer develop, the kind of base beer of Here Be Monsters over the years. The first time I had this beer, actually, if I'm telling a story, was up at our Astoria Brewers Retreat out on the coast of Oregon. And I was hanging out with Andy from Great Notion. And Sean had given me a bottle of Here Be Monsters, and I didn't know what to expect. It's their first, barrel aged release, and so like, hey, I brought this, and Andy knew Sean, and like, okay, let's try. And we drank it, and we both sat there kind of in utter silence after we opened it, and just looked at each other like, wow, it just kind of silenced the room at that point. It was such a dramatic and bold, first foray into barrel-aged release. And then, the next batches came out, and the batches after that, like, they have continued to iterate and improve on from an already incredibly high level. This beer we got, about a month and a half ago. We were able to kind of dig into this, and, in the midst of drinking, and evaluating a lot of these last minute stout entries, which is its own challenge to move through a lot of, tasting panels of these kinds of stouts, just became an utter standout. It's the richness of the beer in terms of that layered malt character and that nice sharp roastiness that was softened, that needed to be there because it was so softened and sweetened by that perception of the incredibly strong vanilla in the beer, that savoriness and that herbalness that the vanilla brings to this kind of semi-sweet to sweet kind of beer. It was just remarkable. And so, of all the vanilla barrel-aged stouts, we do tend to, and I will admit this, I think there is something about barrel-aged stouts with vanilla that ends up being more compelling than those with additional adjuncts piled on top of that. That there is something about that vanilla which heightens the barrel character in a barrel-aged beer because it's a flavor that's already in that kind of barrel-aged, and the vanilla just kind of brings it out and makes it a little more whole. That makes those beers in particular feel so elegant and so refined, and so sophisticated, and yet so satisfying, and rich when they're drank. It's
interesting how common vanilla has become as a beer ingredient.
Yeah.
And I never, like 5 years ago, I never thought I would say those words. But it's not just in stouts, obviously, but in milkshake IPAs and things too. And whether it's a stout or a milkshake IPA, the ones that are done really well use just that light touch of it to where you don't necessarily taste vanilla. You shouldn't, I think. I don't really care for it when I do taste it. But it stokes something deep in our subconscious, those nice childhood flavors of vanilla ice cream and desserts in general, and things baking in the oven, and just like it hits something that signals to your brain, this thing I'm holding in my hand is comforting, and it's nothing like layers and layers of heavy malt to really bring that home.
Well, that is our top 19 beers of 2019 from Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. It's an exhaustive list. Thank you for pushing through this very long podcast and working through our best beers of the year as selected both by our readers and our critics and our editors right here. If you've enjoyed this episode, like I have said before, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and become a supporter of the magazine. Become a reader. It's kind of like a Patreon. We'll keep sending you issues every 2 months, and you can read more writing from Joe. You can read more writing from me. You can read some great perspectives from some of America's top brewers as they share their techniques, as well as some recipes and some fantastic perspectives on how they brew beer. I also want to thank our sponsors. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Tavour makes it possible to access and discover the highest rated craft beers from all over the world. Hopsteiner is a vertically integrated global hop supplier dedicated to delivering the finest hops. And Clarion Lubricants is the expert that experts trust. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Joe.
Hey, it was a pleasure. It was really fun.
Until next week, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.